Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Today we're continuing to learn about the so exciting world of data structures, so that hopefully one day we can build some awesome inventory systems or advanced menus. Now, last time we focused on trying to build a functional list system, and while everything didn't go according to plan, we ended up with a map of data that could be manipulated and reset with ease. Now, the truth is, we did end up with something that worked. However, it's not exactly what we're after. The DS map system we ended up with last time would work if we only had to keep track of one item type. But we want something more advanced. We want to be able to stack similar items and then split those stacks if we want to. So today we'll start exploring other data structure options, more specifically GameMaker's DS Grid. Having never used it before, it'll once again be a purely learning experience with some hopes of having something working by the end of the session. So that'll be the plan for today, and much like last time, I'll be providing some post commentary for this video so you don't have to hear the insane amount of confusion I went through while recording this episode. So let's not waste any more time and get to the learning. Well, much like last time, the first thing I had to do was figure out how DS grids work. The idea behind the DS grid is everything I need could be stored within the grid, and theoretically it could also apply to display of said grid. The problem, which is present throughout the entire session by the way, is keeping track of how the grid is set up. The best way to describe the way that DS Grid functions is it works like a bingo card. The values can be referenced via X and Y coordinates. So I started trying to set up a loop that would create the inventory grid. The grid eventually ended up being basically a 2D array, and setting it up this way was also far more difficult than I anticipated. Now in my head I had the loop for both X and Y, but that was in relation to the amount of max items allowed. I mostly kept attempting to write loops within loops, which wasted a lot of time since none of it worked out properly. Looking back, I definitely made this much harder than it had to be. And that confusion only intensified when I tried drawing the grid. Honestly, that confusion came from having to manipulate two different grids meant for two different purposes. One grid contains the data, the other grid contains the display of said data. And even drawing this grid out in Paint wasn't enough to keep things straight, so for a while I kept coding myself into a circle. But eventually I realized my setup was the first step in fixing this whole mess. At this point, the whole two loops were actually just canceling each other out. All I really had to do was create two loops that would set the X and Y values separately. But the next tricky part was getting it to draw properly. And luckily the loop within the loop technique worked here, and I managed to actually retrieve other grids data and display it as a list. It was a nice start, but not what I was after. Again, I tried a lot of things, but I started losing focus building the visual grid, so I had to get back on track by building a generic grid first. I also had to figure out a way to break down the overall grid data into offsets, since obviously grid-based menus are not all in one line. So building a generic grid actually helped me out with coding for all of that. Thankfully it worked, and after some tinkering I was able to finally display the grid data in a grid format. The next step was figuring out how to properly display both X and Y values per row, then to make sure to offset the whole thing by 5 per row. After more tinkering, I was able to do this with some nice math via the loop within loop, and with any luck this will work with larger grids in the future. Fingers crossed. So now that our data grid is now displayed in a visual grid, I wanted to get some mouse interactivity going. The first challenge was figuring out the proper math for the mouse position. My line of thinking was simple: keep track of the mouse position relative to the menu, and simply keep track of the current cell the mouse is hovered over. In other words, since my cells were 128 by 128 pixels, the mouse position would count which cell number the mouse is currently hovered over. And much like last time, because we're working with numbers here and not word values, keeping track of this data is a whole lot easier. Once I was able to get the math down, which admittedly might be overkill, but hey, it works. I tried moving the grid away from the 0, start position, only to find out that my math still needs some work. My current math is still too static, which wouldn't be a problem, but for flexibility's sake, I want it to be more dynamic. But at this point, my brain was pretty fried from all the mathing and the learning, and I still wanted to try one more thing. I wanted to see how easy manipulating the data would be. So, checking for a left click, I tried simply setting a new added value based on the cell defined by the mouse position. But the problem was that was the entirely wrong way to check for the proper cell. Believe it or not, all the reading, testing, and tinkering to get to this point took about an hour and a half. My brain was pretty fried and I was unfortunately out of time. So sadly, this is where our episode of Let's Dev ends for today. But worry not, I already know what to work on next time and what needs fixing, so hopefully the next time won't be so confusing. But for now, if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell so you actually get notified when new episodes go live. And be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.